So we're in Genesis chapter 34 tonight. Last week in our midweek study, Jacob made some consequential moves for himself and his family. And I want to take a look at this map real quick, if you can pull that up for me. But I want us to be able to track a little bit with what this guy Jacob has been up to. Also, I just always look for opportunities to use my laser pointer. Oh, and when you know it, it's not working. Well, if that isn't something. All right, well, we'll have to do this without the laser pointer. But if you remember, for the last 20 years, Jacob was up northeast in Padanaram, so up off of the corner of our map. He was way up there. And the Lord started speaking to him, and he started to move down to, you see that bottom dot there that says Hebron? That's the path that Jacob was supposed to be taking, sort of an angle cutting across the Jordan River there and down into Hebron and, the region of that we know today as Bethlehem and Jerusalem, Bethel, all right in that region. And you can't see it on this map, but way down south on this corner of the Jordan River, all the way down below the Dead Sea, that's where Esau was at the time, in a place called Seir or Edom. And what Jacob didn't know at first was that Esau was moving toward him and he was moving toward Esau. You have Jacob coming down across like this. You have Esau moving straight up, and they meet right there in Penuel, right around that region. And Jacob gives the word to Esau, you go ahead and head back down to Seir. You go ahead and head back down to Edom there. And I'll be there shortly. Of course, as we discovered, it didn't appear that Jacob really had any intention of doing that. And so once Esau leaves and goes down, we see where Jacob is supposed to go from Penuel down to Hebron, or that region there, Bethel. And as it turns out, he hops northwest to a place called Sukkoth. He's there for quite a while. He actually settles down, takes up roots, has a house. And finally then, as chapter 33 concluded, Jacob has made the move from Sukkoth over into a place called Shechem. He pitched his house there, he pitched his tent right toward the city. That's where we left Jacob. And he is very close to a wicked city that is filled with Hittites. And what we're going to look at is the problems that detour has caused Jacob. He knows where he's supposed to be, and he doesn't go there. He's on detours, personal detours, and those will turn out to be very costly in his life. So the detours cause him problems in Genesis 34, but that's not even the worst of the problems that we see in Genesis 34. A bigger problem is the fact that in this chapter, God is not mentioned one time. It is, if you want to say it like this, a godless chapter of the Bible because it's a godless chapter of Jacob's life. You won't see anyone praying to God in this chapter. You won't see anyone worshiping God in this chapter. You won't see Jacob being obedient to the known will of God in this chapter. And when when things really get bad and the crud hits the fan, you won't see anyone calling out to God for help to intervene. It's a really sad chapter in the life of Jacob. Maybe you've had some chapters in your life like that. I know I have. But I'm so grateful that the Lord never lets us go too far or too long without giving us that wake-up call, stopping us in our tracks and saying, knock it off and seek me. Why are you hiding? Why are you running? Why are you not looking to me? Just knock it off. Your life is a wreck because I'm not in it. Would you just stop and seek me, and I'll give you guidance and I'll help you. And in Genesis 35 next week, I think we're having service now. Yeah, we're having a Wednesday service next week. And in Genesis 35, it's a great chapter. It is basically a family revival. It's Jacob getting the family back to worship, getting the family back to prayer. It's a wonderful chapter, but we can't skip chapter 34 to get to the good news of Genesis chapter 35. Why? Well, because your pastor has us locked into a chapter by chapter, verse by verse study, and chapter 34 just happens to come before chapter 35. So we cover it. The Lord put it in here for a reason, and we're going to cover it. We don't want to skip anything. It is definitely a chapter that we can learn from, some good key pointers to take away. Unfortunately, it's going to be one of those lessons where we get a lot of don't do this kind of lessons instead of the ones we prefer, which is do this lessons. Here's a great example. Follow this example. Well, we're going to be learning from the don't do thises this week here. So let's take a look at Genesis chapter 34. And here we go, verse 1. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. And, well, actually, let's just stop right there for a second at verse 1. We think Dinah was about 13 to 15 years old at this point. She was a young teenager, young, innocent, naive, and she's in a new region, in a new area. She wants to go and hang out with the girls, but these are pagan girls. So, as you might expect, this is going to cause some trouble. It is a very unfortunate thing, a very frustrating thing for Christian parents to sense potentially dangerous situations for your kids and then try to figure out how to proceed. It's a tough situation to be in as a parent because you see the potential for harm there and you're trying to balance that line of not being an overprotective parent, but you also don't want to expose them to unnecessary risks. But it's like this, if you don't use discretion and you just turn them loose to let them go hang out with the kids of the land, as verse 1 tells us, the kids of the world, then there are a lot of negative things that can happen. Bad influence is probably the first thing we see. Emotional harm and, worst of all, physical harm. I wish there were really good answers and, just a manual for step-by-step what to do in every situation. Unfortunately, the Lord doesn't give that to us quite that way in the Scripture, so we do our best with this. And let me just tell you, if you ever get this all figured out, exactly what to do with your kids in every situation, would you please let me know? Would you please talk to me so that I know too? It's a tough situation. The biggest problem is that we live in a dangerous place. Our world is a dangerous place. I wish it weren't that way. I wish, that the kids could go out and hang with the unbelievers and you wouldn't get that very heavy and awful ungodly influence. You wouldn't have all of those dangers from people who have no trouble at all with harming your kids or harming you for that matter. But the cold hard truth is that it's a dangerous world, more so than ever before. So we be careful with this. Verse 2, and when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and violated her. So he has forced himself on Dinah, Jacob's daughter. He has raped her. That is verse 2. He has raped Dinah. Verse 3, his soul was strongly attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the young woman and spoke kindly to the young woman. So what started out as acting on lust, he believes has turned to love. It's a strange thing. He forces himself on this young girl, and then he decides he loves her. And so what does he do? Well, he starts smooth talking her. Now, all I can say is that this is, there's no way around this. He's not sweet talking his way out of this. He has raped her. There's no way around this. But Prince, did you notice there he's a prince in verse 2? Prince Shechem is trying to become Prince Charming because he wants to marry this girl Dinah. But he's not Prince Charming. He's a rapist. He's a frog. No matter how many times you kiss this frog, he's not turning into a Prince Charming. It's like that 86-year-old woman. I don't know if you heard this story, but an 86-year-old woman was out at the park one day going for a walk, and she hears a voice speaking to her as she's in the park, and the voice says, "Pick me up." And so she looks around and couldn't figure out what it was. She hears it again, "Pick me up." And so finally she walks over to where there was a little pond, and she looks down, and there's a frog at the pond there, and the frog is speaking to her, and the frog says, "Pick me up." And she says, "Are you speaking to me?" He says, "I sure am. Pick me up, give me a kiss, and I'll turn into a handsome Prince Charming for you." So the 86-year-old woman, a little bit confused, a little bit off-put by the situation, scratches her head, thinks for a minute, and after a little while, she reaches down and gently picks up the frog, and she puts him in her purse. And from her purse, the frog's yelling out, "What are you doing? Are you crazy? I told you, kiss me, and I'll turn into a Prince Charming, and we'll live happily ever after. We can impress your friends." And so the little 86-year-old woman opens up the purse and speaks to the frog, and she says, "Look, I'm 86 years old, and at this point in my life, I'm just more interested in a talking frog." Now, the point of that very riveting story, I'm trying to loosen you guys up. You guys are tough tonight. The point of that very riveting story is this: a frog is a frog, and you can't make a frog a Prince Charming. This guy cannot end up being the kind of person that Jacob would want married to his daughter. It's just one of those truths that you have to accept, that just because an accident has happened, or in this case, a rape has happened, that premarital sex thing has happened, that's not a good reason to marry. I know there are some preachers that teach that. If you've messed up before marriage and you've had an intimate relationship like that, you need to be an honest person and just marry that person and commit to that person for life. I don't think that's necessarily the right decision. Sometimes maybe, but not always. Sometimes you just get a frog, and the best thing you can do is just, well, keep the talking frog, or, you know, just above all, don't expect a Prince Charming. So verse 4, so Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this young woman as wife." Okay, now, just based on this chapter alone, I would like to make a guess on what kind of young man this guy Shechem was. Here's what I think. I think he was a spoiled brat. All right, let's just look at what we know. In verse 2, we found out that the young man is the prince of a country. What else do we know about him? His name is Shechem, and he lives in the city of Shechem. What does that tell you? That tells you Daddy named an entire city after him. And then in verse 4, look at how this guy Shechem, this young man, talks to his father. He orders his father around. He bosses his father around. He says, "Dad, I found a girl. I really like her. I want to marry her. Go make this happen. You go get her for her. Bring her back to me so that I can marry her." So, reminder to parents real quick before we go to verse 5. You're in charge and your kids are not. Well, you know, most of you are done with raising your kids, and that's amazing, and I envy that in some ways. But good reminder to us who are still parenting kids. We're in charge and they're not, right? I like being able to say stuff like that from the stage. Feels good. Verse 5, and Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter. And what do you expect? You expect Jacob to flip out, don't you? I mean, if ever there's a time for some healthy, righteous indignation, I would think right here would be a fitting place. But you're not going to see that from Jacob. He's not going to flip out about this. He's not going to flip out about his daughter being raped. He's not going to confront Shechem, the guy that did it. He's not going to confront the father of Shechem, Hamor, and confront him over what he did. None of that happens. And I want you to hold on to that thought as we go through this. Reading on, it says, now his sons were with his livestock in the field. So Jacob held his peace until they came. In other words, he was waiting on his sons to finish up their work for the day. I know for sure I can say I would have yelled out into the fields. I would have called a family meeting. We would have started planning on how to respond in a terrible situation like this. But Jacob decides, well, I'll just wait it out when they come in for the day, when they're done working in the field and feeding the animals. Then we'll get together and we'll talk about what happens. Verse 6, then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. So Hamor, the father of Shechem, is actually the first one to get the ball rolling here. He makes the first step in the conversation. Verse 7, and the sons of Jacob came in from the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved and very angry because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, a thing which ought not to be done. Should never happen, ever. And Jacob's sons have overheard all of this, and Jacob's sons are fuming. He's not, but they are. Verse 8, but Hamor spoke with him, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to me as a wife, and make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters to yourselves. So here's Hamor's solution. We want Dinah for Shechem. We want this marriage to happen, but let's not stop there. Let's open the whole thing up. Let's blend our two groups together. Let's intermarry. You people can marry our people can marry your people. Then we'll just sit around the campfire, sing Kumbaya, and live happily ever after. Sounds great. A peace pact in a somewhat hostile region of the world. But I tell you what I see here, not a good thing, but I see a potentially terrible situation taking place, because you know what I think this is? I think this is an attempt by Satan to attack the Messianic line. What aren't the Jews supposed to do in the Old Testament? Intermarry. They are supposed to keep that line pure. Why? Because God is against interracial relationships? No. They're supposed to keep that line pure because of Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, where the Lord gave us a prophecy that through this line, beginning with Adam, through one of Adam's son, which at the time we didn't know which one it was, but through this line, ultimately it would be through Seth, and then Abraham and Jacob and Judah, and all the way through this line, eventually the Lion of the tribe of Judah would come, and that was the Messiah, Jesus Christ. And in that prophecy, Genesis 3:15, we also have a little bit of a heads up that the enemy would constantly be coming against this line. There would be an enmity there. The enemy would constantly be trying to destroy this line because the enemy got the prophecy. If this line goes left unchecked, Messiah is going to come to earth and Messiah is going to save. And I think right there in the very next chapter, Genesis chapter 4, Satan was already at work inspiring Cain. Because put yourself in Cain's situation, as the Lord made it clear, hey, Abel's offering was received, but Cain's wasn't. What do you think Satan would think? He'd say, well, Abel, that's got to be the one. Abel's got to be the son that the messianic line would come through. And so he incites Cain to murder Abel. Only that wasn't the Lord's plan. The Lord had another plan. It would be through the line of Seth. And we go on down through the stories of the Bible and history. During the days of Noah, the enemy tried to infiltrate and muddy up the messianic line through the Nephilim. We covered that. Moving on, you have other attempts through the scriptures. You have Haman, who tried to completely exterminate all of the Jews and wipe out the entire messianic line. And I think what this is just another attempt for the enemy to say, if we become one people and we mix these lines, these families, things are going to get so blurred that God's plan is going to be messed up and he's not going to be able to sustain that messianic line. But Jacob He's not going to buy it. Could sound good on the surface. Hey, there's strength in numbers. Sounds good. There's going to be peace between us. That sounds good. You'll have more choices on who to marry. That sounds good. And he's going to bring this up too. There's also wealth in numbers. Look at verse 10. So you shall dwell with us, and the land shall be before you. Dwell and trade in it, and acquire possessions for yourselves in it. So not only will we be one big happy family, but it'll be good for business too. This is an economic opportunity for your family. But had Jacob gone through this, folks, this would have been the worst trade deal in history, worse than NAFTA. By the way, good thing the Democrats have finally come to the table and passed the new trade deal. USMCA trade deal with Mexico, Canada, and someone else. I wanted to say California. No, that's right. They're still part of us, just barely though. China. And the sad thing was, though, I'm kind of off on a side note here, but the sad thing was to see how the Democrats tried to take credit for that trade deal. I couldn't get over that. Could not get over them trying to take credit for that deal. Who was the one in the first place who said, China, Mexico, Canada, you're not going to rob the U.S. anymore. We need a new trade deal. And who got criticized for doing that? And who was doing the criticisms? Who didn't want this to happen? The left. And ultimately, well, now they're at the table and they're praising themselves for this deal. Okay, I better move on. I'm getting the room heated. I can feel it. Good way to lose friends, politics and religion. We just did both. All right, now Shechem the rapist is going to speak up and promote his request in verse 11. Then Shechem said to her father and her brothers, let me find favor, grace in your eyes. And whatever you say to me, I will give. Ask me ever so much dowry and gift, and I will give according to what you say to me. But give me the young woman as wife. Nothing could be finer than to be engaged to Dinah. No price is too high. I still can't loosen you guys up. Okay, no more jokes. We're just going to be serious from here on out. No price is too high. I'm so in love with this woman. I'll do whatever you ask. I just want to marry this girl. Verse 13. But the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor his father and spoke deceitfully because he had defiled Dinah, their sister. Did you just read verse 13 with me? The sons of Jacob spoke deceitfully to Hamor. Imagine that. I wonder where they got that from. Those apples did not fall far from that tree, folks, like father, like sons. They're starting to act just like Jacob. And what they're going to do here is they are going to come up with quite a ruse, quite a scam here. They're not wanting to make a deal. No, they have a plan of vengeance in mind, and they're going to set Shechem and Hamor and the entire city up to fail. Now, children learn what they are taught, but they also learn by what they see. We can teach them through sermons, but we do have to remember that our lives are sermons as well, except for my kids. They're just supposed to do what I say, regardless of what I do. No, the practice what you preach thing. Practice. Jesus, when speaking of the religious leaders, he said this, do what they say, but don't do as they do, because they're hypocrites. But then when you go further into the New Testament, you'll read of the Apostle Paul standing up and saying, follow me as I follow Christ. Or literally, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Paul was confident in his walk with the Lord. Paul was practicing what he preached and he knew it. And he was confident to say, you can follow me because I'm following the Lord. I'm not just preaching sermons to you. I'm living it out. You can listen to me. You can watch me. You can follow me. And we'll all be going in the right direction. So I like that. Practice what you preach. Because our lives are sermons too. Well, Now comes the ruse. Here we go. Verse 14. Here's the big plan. These guys have definitely watched their father too long. And they said to them, "We cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a reproach to us. But on this condition we will consent to you. If you will become as we are, if every male of you is circumcised, then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters to us, and we will dwell with you, and we will become one people." Now, is that really all that it would take to make these people of the city of Shechem one with the line of Israel? Is that really all it would take, getting circumcised? Of course not. Getting circumcised does not make you have a relationship with the Lord. That doesn't necessitate the other. In this case, getting circumcised is not going to make you a Jew. Now, we would look at that in New Testament terms, and we would say it something like this: doing the rites, because that's what circumcision is, a rite, a ritual. Doing the rites, doing the rituals of the church doesn't make you a Christian either. You can take communion, you can observe communion, you can get baptized in water. That doesn't make you a Christian. It's not the rite that makes a person a Christian or a follower of the Lord. So they are definitely not being on the level with this guy. This is deception. This is a ruse. Verse 17. "But if you will not heed to us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and be gone." Verse 18, "And their words pleased Hamor and Shechem." And I'm wondering, how on earth is that possible? I mean, did Hamor not hear what was just proposed? But the scripture says their words pleased Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. So the young man did not delay to do the thing. What thing? Circumcision. Because he delighted in Jacob's daughter. And now this is a tough statement to read, but it does say it. Speaking of Shechem, he was more honorable than all the household of his father. So Shechem gets circumcised right away, no delay. He just wants his bride. He's eager to get married to her. Remember, no price was too high. Circumcision, fine, whatever it meant, just so that he could marry Dinah. And we can't get too stuck on the words here that this Shechem guy was more honorable than the others, because that's not really saying a whole lot. But he did have this going for him. Number one, he really did love Dinah. Now that doesn't negate or justify the rape, of course, but he did love her. He was truly willing to do anything to get her. And I believe what the scripture's telling us here by calling him an honorable man is that he was owning up to what had happened, and he was willing to take this woman, make her his wife, and provide for her and love her. So there's some honor in that. Again, though, we're comparing Shechem with the rest of the city of Shechem, so it's not saying a whole lot. All right, now, here we go. I like this. We're moving through this quick. This is great. Sorry, Liz. I'm trying to be long tonight, but it's just not happening. So now, this is the fun part, because now Hamor has a tall task. You know what he's got to do? He's made an agreement that all of the males in the city of Shechem are to get circumcised, so that they can have this peace accord and this trade deal and this economic joining. And now he's got to go back to the men of the city, and he's got to sell them on this idea. So wisely, look at how he starts. He doesn't lead off with the circumcision thing. He's a little smarter than that. He's going to lead off with this, verse 20. "And Hamor and Shechem his son came to the gate of their city." Why the gate of the city? Because that's where all of the business deals happen. It's where the important people of the city met. It's where the leaders hung out. It's where judgments were made, decisions were made, important conversations were had. So this is the place to get this deal communicated. And, reading on, spoke with the men of their city, saying, these men, that is Jacob's family, are at peace with us. Therefore, let them dwell in the land and trade in it, for indeed the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters to us as wives, and let us give them our daughters. So notice he starts with the good news. He tells them the benefits of the deal, the benefits of joining together in community with the family of Jacob. And once they're intrigued about the good stuff, the benefits, all right, here comes the bad news. Verse 22, only on this condition, there is one condition, there is one hitch, a lot of good stuff, but there is this one thing. Only on this condition will the men consent to dwell with us, to be one people, and that is, if every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised. So there is this one condition. They have this weird religious belief where their men need to be circumcised. And if we make this deal, there's a lot of great things that are going to come of it, but they do want us to go along with this religious belief. They want us to be circumcised too. Verse 23, will not their livestock, their property, and every animal of theirs be ours? Only let us consent to them, and they will dwell with us. So, kind of a smart way that he laid this out. He made a garbage sandwich. He had the good news on top. He's going to come back up and follow up with more good news, but in the middle was still garbage. In the middle was still the tough thing to take, the bad news of all of this. They would have more choice in marital partners, new members of the community. They get to add to their wealth. It's a great boost to their economy. And do you notice the difference here? Hamor hasn't exactly been completely forthright and honest with Jacob and Jacob's sons. Because if you read about what Hamor promised to Jacob and Jacob's sons, you'll see that he promised this. Jacob, you and your family, if you join with us, everything that we have becomes yours, and you can trade and you can get wealth from us. But when he goes to his people, what does he say? He says, everything of theirs will be ours. Now, I think that's the true heart behind Hamor. He tells them, come in, you get to benefit from everything we have. But what he's really wanting, what he's really feeling is this. When you come in and be a part of us, we are going to rob you blind. We're going to take everything you have. Your wealth is going to be absorbed by us. Verse 24, and all who went out of the gate of this city heeded Hamor and Shechem his son. Every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of his city. And then verse 25, now it came to pass on the third day when they were in pain. Now, you understand why they're in pain, right? They had just done surgery. I can't imagine they had anyone that had any experience in this kind of surgery. This is an all-new medical procedure for them, and they do it. They circumcise themselves, and so they're sore, and that was a big part of the plan. Why did they do this? Unbelievable. Money, women, intermarriage, more opportunity. It's crazy to think that they would do this for this, but, if you think about it, people do it in the world today with the church. They do this same sort of thing, especially guys. Now, I know it works both ways, but especially guys. There's that beautiful church girl, and that unbeliever meets that beautiful church girl, and he's interested in that beautiful church girl. That's his Dinah. And When he finds out that the beautiful church girl will have nothing to do with him because of what we covered last week, not to be unequally yoked with an unbeliever. When she finds out when he finds out, no, I can't be in any kind of relationship with you. I certainly can't marry you because I'm a believer. And it is a requirement for me that when I marry in the Lord. What does the guy do? Well, he instantly becomes saved by his profession. You need me to be saved? Okay, I'm saved. Always believed in God. Now I'm a Christian. Praise the Lord. Hallelujah. Let's get this relationship going. And then you get married, and a handful of years down the road, you find out this guy was doing this same kind of thing, right? He was going through the motions. He was giving somewhat of some kind of conversion profession, but he was doing it for something. He was doing it for gain. He was doing it because of his own lust or his own love. So, especially you young ladies in the Christian faith, be careful of this. Be warned. Expect to see a track record in the guy that wants to court you. You need to know he was a Christian before he developed eyes for you, right? And for that matter, men, you do the same thing, right? Verse 25. Now it came to pass on the third day when they were in pain that two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took a sword and came boldly upon the city and killed all the males. These two. Why these two? Simeon and Levi. Well, because these two were full brothers to Dinah. Dinah and Simeon and Levi were sons of Jacob and Leah, the unloved wife. Not all of the sons in this family were full brothers to her. She had a lot of half-brothers that were born through a handmaiden, or one that was born at this point through Rachel. But these are her full brothers. And these two alone go through and kill every man in the city. Why? Because they couldn't fight. They didn't have a standing chance because it hurt to stand. They were sore. This was all part of the plan. Immobilize them, incapacitate them. They won't be able to fight. It gives you the military advantage. And these two go through and they kill every single male in that city. They have flipped out and murdered them. And this would be something that Jacob could never really get past. At the end of his life, when it's time to pronounce the blessings on his sons, he doesn't have much good to say about these two, Simeon and Levi. Let's read it. Look at Genesis chapter 49, verse 5. Listen to Jacob's quote-unquote blessing on these two, Simeon and Levi. He says this: Simeon and Levi are brothers. Instruments of cruelty are in their dwelling place. Let not my soul enter their council. Let not my honor be united to their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man, much more than a man, many men. And in their self-will they hamstrung an ox. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. And you read that and you go, whoa. Jacob never forgave these two. There's no hope for these two. These two are cursed. They're going to be scattered and divided. There's just no hope for these two, right? But that would be wrong. Why? Because when you fast forward then into the book of Exodus, there's Moses up on the mountaintop receiving the law from God. And he comes down ready to deliver the law to the people, and the assistant pastor, Aaron, has created for them a new god, a golden cow. And Moses comes down and sees that, and he says, holy cow. That's where that expression came from. I can't ever pass that story without saying that. Moses comes down and sees it, and Moses is angry. And right there in Exodus chapter 32, verse 26, Moses says this. He stood in the entrance of the camp and said, "Whoever is on the Lord's side, come to me." And the scripture says, all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together to him. Incredible, right? Now, when you fast forward to the institution of the tabernacle, the way that it was supposed to work is that the Lord was supposed to take all of the firstborn in the entire nation of Israel, and every firstborn was to be dedicated to him. They were to be the ministry workers, the priests, the tabernacle servants. But by the time we get to the creation of the tabernacle, here's the issue. There's way too many firstborn. That's way too many ministry people. That's way too many priests. So the Lord says what? As he's instructing the tabernacle, as he's given the sacrificial system to the people, what does he say about the priests? He says, give me the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi? Do you realize what happened? One of the absolute worst tribes in the nation, God has taken and turned into a priesthood. Why? Because when Moses said, who is on the Lord's side? The tribe of Levi did not hesitate. They were the first, and they were completely committed. They stepped forward and said, we're going to be on the Lord's side. Yeah, we really messed up with the golden cow thing. Temporary insanity. But we get it. We're back. We're on the Lord's side. And the Lord took them and turned them into a priesthood. And the Lord still does the same thing today. He takes the worst of us. And he turns us into what? Well, 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9. You are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you should proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. I'm so glad that he still does that. He will take the worst of us. And regardless of our past, our sin, our failures, regardless of the curses that we believe are over our lives, if we'll step forward, he can take us and put us into this holy priesthood spoken about in 1 Peter chapter 2. Well, verse 26, let's finish this up. And they killed Hamor and Shechem his son with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah from Shechem's house. Did you just read that? They took Dinah from Shechem's house, which means it appears that Jacob actually let his daughter go and be with this guy Shechem. It appears as if this was really happening if the sons of Jacob wouldn't have stopped it. And it says they went out. 27, the sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city. I guess that means now all the other sons got involved. And they're taking the spoils from the city because it says their sister had been their sister had been defiled. Verse 28, they took their sheep, their oxen, and their donkeys, what was in the city and what was in the field, and all their wealth, all their little ones and their wives they took captive, and they plundered even all that was in the houses. So it is stuff like this that gives God a bad name. It really is, because people read the Bible and they really quickly come to the understanding that Jacob is God's chosen man and that this family is God's chosen family. And they'll read stuff like this and they'll say, I can't believe that God wanted this to happen. Well, duh. Whoever said God wanted this to happen? God did not sanction this. This wasn't an act of God. This was something that was an absolute abomination to the Lord. This was reprehensible to God. What his sons did was absolutely horrendous. And you know how this all could have been avoided? Back to that map we looked at. You don't have to put it up, but back to that map we looked at the beginning. Jacob was in the wrong place. He knew where he was supposed to be. He wasn't following the Lord. He was out of the Lord's will. Had he just gone where and when the Lord called him, all of this would have been avoided. Now, from stories like this should help you to really value and appreciate some of the laws of God that we read of in the Old Testament as God is laying down the law through Moses. One of those laws says this: an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And that law gets a lot of, I guess, flack from the world because they feel like God is being mean by saying that, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But you got to understand, when God wrote that law at a future point from where we are in Genesis, when God wrote that law, He was not doing that to get people to step up their punishments or their vengeance against crimes committed against them. That's not what the Lord was doing. When He wrote that law, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, here's what He was doing. He was fixing it so that stuff like this, Genesis 34, didn't happen. Because God knows it is our tendency when there's a crime or a sin committed against us, it is our tendency as human beings to what? To want to one-up them. It is our tendency to want absolute vengeance. Here's an example. You punch me in the mouth and I lose a tooth. What am I likely to say? All right, I'm punching you back and you are going to need dentures because I'm knocking all your teeth out. Tooth for teeth. That's the way I would look at it. That's the way the flesh would naturally look at it. You did this to me, okay? I'm going to do something even worse to you. You poke out one of my eyeballs, all right? You're losing both of yours. And so this was actually the Lord regulating punishment by saying that the punishment has to fit the crime. It's one eye for one eye and one tooth for one tooth. Now, I don't know how you exactly judge in a situation of rape, but let's face it, folks. Only one person raped Jacob's daughter. One person. And who died because of that crime? Every male in the city. That's overkill. And that's what the Lord wants us to avoid. That's why He gives us that law, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Of course, Jesus will come in the future and speak about that even more. But verse 30, let's read on. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have troubled me by making me obnoxious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And since I am few in number, they will gather themselves together against me and kill me. I shall be destroyed. Oh, and by the way, my household too. Sort of an afterthought. Oh yeah, my whole household's going to be wiped out. But what does Jacob have here in verse 30? He has a serious case of the eyes. He has an eye problem. Not one that you go to an eye doctor for. He has an eye problem. I, me. What you guys did, look at how this affects me. You've made me look bad. You've hurt my reputation. You've put my life on the line. Now, I don't have a whole lot of time. If I did, I might make a bigger deal out of this. But let me just say this. Jacob seems very interested in how this affects him, but not in how it affects the family. He doesn't seem to be saying, look at what they did to her, and how is this going to affect her future? He's saying, me, I. You wrecked my name in this city. You've endangered my life, and oh, by the way, too, my whole family. Yeah, sure, but me. All right? And what we're seeing from Jacob in this whole chapter, again, not to nitpick, but it's a fact. What we're seeing from Jacob in the whole chapter is we're seeing him very uninvolved and passive in the lives of his kids. And man, has that been speaking to me this week, and if I'm being honest, convicting me a little bit. Because we're all so busy, and I don't need to tell you how busy I am. If you think you know how busy I am, trust me, you have no idea. Well, yeah, but Arlyn, we saw your Facebook post. There you were this morning at 7:30 at the coffee shop hanging out with your wife, drinking coffee. Can't be that busy, right? Okay, well, yeah, we forced in a half hour for us today, right? And what did I say? I gotta hurry and get back. No, I'm busy. Just like you're busy. Just like parents are busy. Parents juggle so much, and yet they got to be so careful. I'm speaking to myself here. Got to be so careful that they don't get so wrapped up in I, me. In my case, ministry, that they become uninvolved and passive in the lives of their children. I think a lot of this too, like I have to ask the question, when Dinah ran off to be with the girls of the city there, why don't we read of Leah or Jacob saying, well, hey, you have a lot of brothers. Take some brothers with you. Or me and Dad will go with you. But what we see from Jacob, especially in this chapter, is very uninvolved, very passive, and a lot of heartbreak has come from this. So we admit that parenting isn't easy. Dealing with catastrophes like this in a family are difficult. I've been in plenty of family situations where I don't know what to do. But what we get from Genesis 34 really doesn't look good on Jacob. He seems too wrapped up in his life. So I'm just going to say to us, be very careful that we don't get too wrapped up in our lives, that we're neglecting the people that the Lord really wants us taking care of, especially you parents and your kids. Their entire futures depends on how we parent them right now. Now that I'm good and convicted, let's read verse 31. But they said, should he treat our sister like a harlot? Well, good point. Really good point. Dad, you weren't doing anything, so we had to do something. Now, what they did was terrible, for sure, but they make a good point. Dad, you just weren't there. You didn't fix the problem. Well, let's close with that. A lot of additional stuff that I could say about that. But let's finish chapter 34 with that. And next week we'll be in Genesis 35, a much cheerier chapter. You don't have to hear about circumcision. You don't have to hear about rape. I'm so thankful there weren't, no young ones here tonight. This was perfect for us. We get this chapter out of the way. Learn what we can from it. And the good stuff, the revival, Genesis 35 is coming next week. So would you stand with me? And let's pray.